sponsored by Massachusetts Peace Action and the Community Church of Boston. Massachusetts Peace Action is a local anti-war group and a peace group here in Massachusetts. And Community Church of Boston is a really great church in Boston focused on social justice and all types of activism. Brian will share their link in the chat so people can check them out. We're really excited tonight to be joined by Jodie Evans, who is the co-founder of CODEPINK. We will be talking about how China is not our enemy. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. It's going to be moderated by Zoe Stevenson and Drew Baldwin. Zoe is a third-year undergraduate student at Northeastern University and a new intern here at Massachusetts Peace Action. She's part of the Peace and Climate and Racial Justice Decolonization Working Groups here at Mass Peace Action and is working to learn more about US and China relations. Drew is a rising senior at Northeastern University, studying international affairs and East Asian studies. For the last several months, Drew has served as an intern at Mass Peace Action, and she's been a really active and important member of the No New Cold War Working Group of MAPA. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to our moderators to begin tonight's discussion. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. And yes, Zoe and Drew, take it away.
All right, so we wanted to start off by introducing our wonderful guest, Jodie Evans. Jodie Evans is the co-founder of CODEPINK, a woman-led grassroots organization working to end US wars and militarism, support peace and human rights initiatives, and redirect their tax dollars into life-affirming programs. And I know Jodie wants to introduce herself a little bit, so I can pass the floor to you.
Thanks, Zoe. So it's really great to see everybody and have so many people care about this campaign and this issue. So I'm here representing CODEPINK, and I think what's first most important to say is CODEPINK is a community of amazing peace activists. So just one voice, and I really want to acknowledge that the team is on here, RJ and Madison, who run the campaign, and also a lot of the members of the volunteers that really support the work. And so that for me is like the most important thing about being a peace activist, is that we work in coalition and together and in community and as teams. So just a little bit about me, that, you know, the arc of my work. I started in the late 60s as an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War, and also lived in Las Vegas, which is where the test site was. And my first arrest was in 1969 outside the test site. And then I was a maid in 1970 making $1.87 an hour. And we were organized to march for living wage, and we won. Jane Fonda came and marched with us. So I also worked to 18-year-olds to get the right to vote. And so in the beginning, I got to see a lot of victories, and they have fueled me for the rest of my life. As in 1970, it was to take on the man, to take on the violence of the patriarchy, which is one thing that kind of led me to be outside the White House with Medea the day we started CODEPINK, was that I was working in Watts with gang members in a community in Los Angeles where 20,000 people had died in 20 years. And naively I said, oh, let's just show all the gang members that all men are the same. And we pulled in a governor and a billionaire and, you know, lots of men went around the circle. And when we did, I realized that every single one of the gang members' dads had been in Vietnam. And that, you know, that had come home to our community, and it had been devastating. And so I know also how these wars come home and the prices are paid by generations of people onward. And so that's what sent me screaming to Washington in September of 2002 to say no war on Iraq. So that's just a little more about me instead of like the details of what I've done in my life. So thank you, Zoe, for the introduction.
Thank you, Jodie, for joining us, and thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for the introduction. And then just the final introduction, I was just going to talk a little bit about the structure of this webinar, what's going to happen in the next hour. And I just want to acknowledge that although this webinar is a little bit about China, it's also about US-China relations. And so in order to acknowledge China in this world system, we are acknowledging it from the lens of our US relation to China. And so a lot of the issues we're talking about are kind of a broader range of things, ranging from climate change to the potential threat of war between the US and China, to opportunities for diplomacy. And I also just wanted to address very quickly that if and when we do bring up topics about anti-Asian discrimination and racism, it's lovely, and I'm really happy this is a panel of women, but it is a panel of white women, so we cannot speak from our own personal experiences. And all we can do is bring these issues to the forefront and bring these issues to light and talk about how the history and the politics surrounding them ignite this dangerous rhetoric and what we can do to help and what everyone else in the audience can do to help. So before we dive into these subjects, the first thing we're going to be talking about is just a little bit more about Code Pink and exactly what the China is not our enemy campaign is, and then a little bit more about diplomacy potentially between the US and China, climate change, opportunities for allyship. And we also want to touch a little bit about the kind of competing narratives and media surrounding the discrimination on the Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region. And we want to recognize that that is also a very sensitive subject. And then finally, we do want to talk a little bit about the intersection of feminism, peace, and the anti-war movement. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. Thank you again to the Community Church of Boston for co-sponsoring this. Thank you to Jody and everyone else in Code Pink that has worked with us. And I'm excited to get started. And hopefully we have a little bit of time for a Q&A at the end of this as well. So thank you for listening. And without further ado, I will get started with the very first question. And so as Amar said, I am part of the No New Cold War working group here at MAPA. And within this group, we do a lot of issues, or we do a lot of work that address kind of the dangerous anti-China rhetoric and the possibility of war between the US and China. And similarly, I know Code Pink has a campaign called China is Not Our Enemy campaign. I was hoping you could first tell us a little bit more about what exactly that campaign is. And secondly, if you could expand a little bit on why you chose the phrasing of China is not our enemy rather than No New Cold War. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Drew. And just, huge gratitude to Mass Peace Action for all you do and for joining in this work. Let's see, a year and a half ago, I started to see all this propaganda come out about China. And, as a peace activist, you recognize propaganda because you start to see the same headline and article in every newspaper you read, and you see that it was planted. And it was just a press release out of the Pentagon. And it started to feel very much like the beginning of the push for war in Iraq. I was just like, oh my God, there's a war brewing on China. Definitely an aggression on China. China hadn't done anything. There was, I felt the shift because I had been going to China and posting stories about it on my Facebook, and people were loving it. I wasn't getting angry messages. I was like, wow, that's cool. Thanks for bringing back the story. And then all of a sudden the tenseness shifted. And so, I talked to Medina, I was like, there's, the next target is China, and we've got to get ahead of it. And we have, not only ahead of it, but the problem, the same with Iraq is, people do know where China is on the map, which they didn't about Iraq, but they don't know a lot about it. And it's a lot of lies and a lot of contortion and really, it's quite violent the way most people in the United States look at China. It's not relational for sure. And so it was the point, as an activist and a campaigner, it's how do you have a message that needs to deliver what you're trying to do? And this is an aggression on China. So it was China is not our enemy, felt like a place to start from. And that in the beginning, it was, how do I start to, what is China? How do you learn about it? by creating China as an enemy, you create violence against Asians in the United States. It felt like the right entry point into a campaign. We are part of the No Cold War Coalition, and we have this conversation a lot about that name. My concern about that was that all the US aggressions on Asia, the US has lost. And there are people in the United States that see the Cold War as something we won. And I feel that what is happening between China and the United States is an existential threat to the future of the planet. And it's not about winning and losing. It's really like, how do you, this is a moment where the work of our lifetimes as anti-war activists is that war is never the answer. This is here. And so I didn't want to include the war in the, no Cold War. I mean, this is, how do you get to the sinews of what is happening here? And yes, they're nuclear opponents, but China is not Russia. And it's all very different than that Cold War. Yes, it's an aggression by the United States, but most people in the United States don't know that. They think it was an aggression on the United States by Russia. So it just felt like it's already complicated to start unpacking. It felt like it was easier to unpack around a way that to interrupt. What do we do as anti-war activists is we try to be friction on the train that's running out of the station, or we try to, disrupt their story. And that felt like also the best disruption to their story was that China is not our enemy.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I don't think I've ever, exactly thought about it in that way, in the sense that also, I suppose, if you have the terminology of no new Cold War, you enter this issue of people just completely rejecting the fact that there is no Cold War, where if you have a China is not our enemy, there's less of a rejection for China is clearly our enemy, whether or not it's in a Cold War, a hot war, world or mindset. And then just a quick follow-up. I mean, do you think, as an activist, and what you've seen in terms of the relationship between what you've seen in the media from the Iraq War and what you've seen during this time with our, rhetoric towards China, do you think that there is a real possibility of some sort of conflict between the US and China? Or do you think that if there is a possibility, it's quite far off? And if you have an opinion on that.
I certainly think there's a possibility, especially when you hear the insane rhetoric coming out of the people in Washington. You can see how unstable they are in what they're saying, and the hubris that they're coming from is quite frightening. So I also think that China has been humiliated enough, and so they're not going to back down. And those two, that combination is scary. I think when you prepare for something, more than likely it's going to happen. Not preparing for it would make it so it couldn't happen. And I'm like, so let's not prepare for it if it's not going to happen. And that's, you have missiles set up to go somewhere. We've been living on a lot of luck, and we know that as anti-nuke activists. How long does that luck hold out? How intense are these new weapons? But all that, CODEPINK, from the very beginning, war is not green has been part of our messaging. And the preparing for war is a violence to the planet. It's a violence to people. It already is a war. So even this preparation for war needs to be stopped, and it needs to be stopped for all the same reasons. But if you start to escalate, escalations go places, and you don't get to stop the chaos you create. And unfortunately, one of the tools that the Pentagon uses, and they're quite proud of it, and they've told me to my face in Iraq, is they just want to create chaos. Well, we see what happens when they create chaos. Tons and tons and tons of people die, and it doesn't seem to bother them. But they're not, they don't take seriously who China is or how they think, in the same way they didn't take seriously who Afghanistan is and how Afghans think, or who Iraqi are and how they think, you know, or any of the places where we invade and extract and oppress. And so that same pattern is, we're not up against a country of, you know, I don't know, 36 million or 20 million. We're up against a country of 1.5 billion with a level of, you know, I used to say before the Iraq war, you know, Iraq was the most educated country in the world per capita. Well, we have another country where it's super educated, and that education hasn't been dumbed down over the last 30 years, or what I call the essential things of life, like education and food, have been cared for, where infrastructure, education, and food have not been central to the United States.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think that this actually segues pretty appropriately into Zoe's little section, which is less about exactly the threat of war between the US and China and kind of a more optimistic outlook of what can we do to cooperate with China. So thank you, Jody. And Zoe, take it away.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the preparation for war as violence on the planet, and I do want to build on that. In preparing for this webinar, I watched a lot of your past interviews where you talked about China. And as someone that's primarily concerned about climate, what really stuck out to me is your assertion that in order to combat climate change, we need to work with China. And we agree with you here at MAPA. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about what you thought that might look like, how you envision us working with China on climate change.
Thanks, Zoe. So yeah, you know, the fights in the White House right now about China are with Kerry, who is, you know, taken on the climate change problem. My old boss, Jerry Brown, who also is concerned about the planet, has created an entire school at Berkeley. I think it's called the US-China Climate School. He's done it with the #1 Chinese that #1 that represented China at COP in Paris, and they've been working together. He's been working with Bill Perry. I mean, like, all I know is that the only way we're going to address any of the problems that we have right now is through cooperation. We live, I mean, war right now, it's just, my brain like fries at how stupid it is, antiquated it is, barbaric in the sense of just the level of violence and destruction that it creates, that we as conscious people would even think that war is the answer. It just baffles me. And so, you know, right now with the problems that we have globally, the only thing anyone should be doing that has any level of power right now is working on global cooperation on all these issues. Climate change is happening. Look at right now with these floods in Europe and China and the fires in the US. It's not like you have to imagine yourself somewhere. We are in the middle of climate change. We are also in the middle of a war on China. It's not like in the future. It's happening already. And the tools of war, you know, as Medea wrote, you know, her book on drones, it was like, we keep looking at CODEPINK as the tools of war continue to shift so that you can't call it a war, right? We saw this with the war in Iraq. Don't let anybody see the body bags. Don't have, you know, recruit soldiers instead of draft soldiers. All the ways that got in the way of the war in Vietnam. Oh, we can't do that anymore. We have to do this differently. Oh, now we're not going to use soldiers. We're going to use drones. Oh, now we're going to use warfare and lawfare, and we're going to weaponize human rights. So these wars are going on right now at a time when our attention needs to be paid to how do we stop this escalation of climate change. And that's the first thing. The second thing is to do this preparation for war. We know that it is war is the greatest contributor to climate change. And thanks, Abby Martin is going to make a movie about this. She's working on it right now, because nobody talks about the effects of war on the climate and how bad it is. And she's worked on some numbers that show even if we get off fossil fuels, if we're still raging, we're still moving towards a horrendous climate catastrophe. And people need to understand that more and more. But it really needs to be core to this mess. I mean, it was core to the beginning of the messaging of China's not our enemy. China's not our enemy, and we need to be cooperating on climate change, and we need to be cooperating on poverty and the, you know, the people, the needs of the people.
Yeah, on the topic of cooperation, you sort of touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can go into a little bit more detail. Outside of climate change, what other opportunities do you see for cooperation or diplomacy between the US and China?
Well, 600 years ago, European countries jumped in their boats and colonized the world. And China burned their boats and built the Silk Road. And trade is an important way to be in relationship and learn from each other and be in cooperation. And actually, probably if we cooperated more in the market, and I'm not calling the market capitalism, I'm calling the market the place where trade happens, where, you know, we serve the needs of the people through the relationship of trade. I think that if we started to cooperate more in there, we would be destroying the planet less. We would be serving the people more. So that's another place of cooperation. Also on poverty, China figured out a way to take all of its people out of poverty. Now, I mean, just to put that in some context, in 1825, China was 25% of the global GDP. And then Europe and England and everybody, you know, started attacking China. And in 1970, it was one of the 10 poorest countries on the planet. And so now it's in competition with the United States as an economic competitor. So, you know, this is a lot to take 1.5 billion people out of poverty. Like, how did that happen? That we don't have a curiosity around that, especially many of us live in cities where we have people living in tents outside of our front door. And how did that happen? Now, some of the processes might not be what some people like, but at least knowing it could happen and quit saying it can't happen, that's a step forward. You know, I think we don't understand where technology is. I think that needs cooperation, not alienation, because technology, if you talk to people inside of it, they say they don't even know what they're creating. Like, it's at a level beyond maybe human understanding. Should we be cooperating in this area? Shouldn't we be learning from each other? Shouldn't we be sharing? It feels like we're playing with a lot of very dangerous things, and cooperation is necessary. So yes, where we are in this time in history, it needs to be all about cooperation.
Take it away, Drew.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I actually think that I might open with this question instead of, I think the next section that we would like to talk about is a little bit about the mistreatment of the Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region. But I think just as an opener, I'm wondering exactly how you would look at something like US intervention abroad, you know, within this idea of at what point is there a threshold that we reach where we do intervene on human rights, and kind of the relationship between US intervention and maybe US cooperation with other countries in kind of a relational way. And if you think that there is any justification sometimes for a country like the US to go in and intervene when there are certain abuses, or exactly how we define those and who defines those.
Well, I think it starts with what you just said, who defines those. And so I think that human rights right now on the planet is very complicated. And, you know, who decides what the world should be like, I don't think is the United States. I'm a feminist. My life is dedicated to ending the patriarchy. And so to be living inside of the empire, first of all, I have kids. It makes you stupid to live in an empire, for starters, because it dehumanizes you in ways that are frightening. And empires have come and gone. I'm very excited for the US empire to lose its medals because it's not good for anyone. It's not good for anyone on the globe, and it's certainly not good for the people who live in the United States of America, which, it's full of lots of amazing, wonderful people. The structure itself is quite violent and oppressive and destructive. So, your question of I don't think the United States should intervene anywhere. Too often we read, in history that the human rights violations have been constructed by US intervention. So I don't trust a lot. And I've, grown up and lived through these years of a lot of lies out of the United States, out of the State Department, out of the CIA, a lot of murders and contortions. So, this campaign is constructed knowing that the tool that one of the tools of war they've already laid out is the weaponizing of human rights, because they know they have the whole country except for the left and progressives. And so, part of our campaign is that we're not going to go into the he said, she said of any of these stories. Our campaign goal is that China is not our enemy, and that if you care about human rights, war is the worst thing that could happen. Not only war, but let's just start with sanctions. Let's, what human rights have been improved in Iran because of our sanctions, or anywhere else in the world where we've imposed sanctions. Human rights are the first to go. Well, the first thing in war to go is the truth, and then it's human rights. So my answer to anyone that wants to talk about human rights is that if you care about human rights, then you need to be on my side, ending war and creating cooperation, where, we can start to have the conversation, because these things have to happen in conversations so we understand values, and we can, deciding that the United States of America is all the right values and they get imposed on the world is not right. So I work on the human rights in the United States. I mean, we have more people in jail in the United States. We have people in solitary confinement. We kill people. We have, we just did a big ad in the New York Times on Cuba, and a lot of the signers got attacked. And, it's like, are you going to listen to the 11 million Cubans that live in Cuba that were starving, or 600 that have decided they don't like Cuba anymore? It's who's, who tells the story? What's the truth? As a feminist and as a woman, I listen to the people closest on the ground in the largest mass of them.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that it's pretty important, even as I was growing up, I, was taught in US history classes, a very specific view of what kind of world history is from a very Americanized Western democracy way. And I think that a lot of people my age have kind of honestly only just recently started to think about things differently. And I think that there's a lot of people in the younger generation that are becoming more and more anti-US intervention. But I do think that there is also a large number of students, myself included, that still have trouble sometimes exactly just not trusting everything that comes out of the media and the government, because for most of our lives, that's almost exactly what we were taught to think and believe. And so I'm just wondering exactly how, or if you have any advice on how to navigate that and navigate competing narratives within kind of US media, US government, and how to decipher exactly what the truth might be, and if that even matters.
Well, I guess if you can't decipher it, is that the truth that matters? You know, if you can't, you know, it's kind of in our work. If you can't, if you don't have a hand on the lever of change, then, you know, what are you doing there? You know, you're fretting. I call it the folly of fretting, because we fret about a lot of things that we don't have our hand on the lever of change about. And I just direct people back to, what do you have your hand on the lever of change? You all in Massachusetts had your hand on the lever of change to, you know, pull the pants down of Markey last week and say, even though that's over, even though you voted that way, you lied, you misrepresented, you used something to get elected, and you failed. You know, that is where you have a lever. That is where you can create capacity. But these things that are very far away, look, I live in Los Angeles. I work on the human rights in my own city. If somebody asks me, you know, like, what do I do to, I find a lever that I can help on Palestinian human rights. What do? I join in a campaign that the Palestinians started, a campaign, BDS campaign, where I can do something in my own community. I can go to a store and protest a product. Why do we do that? Because we elevate the story, give people a chance to get angry, and then be able to articulate what's happening out of their kind of idea of what's happening, so that you build a movement, so that you can create change. There, you know, there's steps to change. And I just want to remind us all that here we are this week. I'm you know, been steeped in Cuba and Palestine, you know, watching the backlash to Ben and Jerry's, that people who kill Palestinians can't have their ice cream, and then the backlash to the Cuba ad, while we're starving people to death in Cuba. So if you want to talk about human rights, here's where you have actually levers. You have your own government that you live in that is starving the people of Cuba, you know, and that is funding the violence on the people of Palestine. And, you know, for us, as we start this campaign towards China, like, let's remember that the struggle in Palestine is, you know, 70 years, you know, 60 years and 60 years of struggle with Cuba. We have a movement to build. We have to look at, like, what are we doing? And we are trying to debunk the stupidity of the American people around China. And we are trying to build a movement that has a big tent, so that we can actually affect change. So I just say, like, I mean, I don't know why you're there. You know, if that's what, you know, you want to figure out, I would send them to some places to get some information that's different than the information they have, like the Chow Collective, or even there's a couple of people in China that speak English that have been going there and come back with another narrative, but they're both narratives, and I call it the he said, she said, of things that you don't have your hands on. So we each have our lives, and what can we put it to? And we have a lot, right? There's a lot in our face. So what can I actually put my life to where I can affect change? And that's how I answer those questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you bringing up the parallel between Palestine and Israel and maybe US-China relations, because actually, as we were preparing for this webinar, we kind of made that same parallel where there are these competing narratives and he said, she said, and people worry about not even having these conversations because they're worried about what they might say wrong or what they might say wrong in the eyes of someone else. And I think that the only way to really understand them is to talk about it more. And I think that brings us to our next.
Well, can I just respond to that?
Oh, of course, please do. Yeah.
So certainly at CODEPINK, we say things wrong every day to some people. You know, we say a lot of things wrong that people get angry with every day. So I don't think it's about right and wrong. It's about, where are your values? And, you know, you can see in this Ben and Jerry fight, I just look at the people and just like, I know where their values are and they're living out their values. I mean, you know, it's kind of like the confusion. Well, why would we want to go to war in China again? We've lost every war in China, but that's not the point. The point is going to war. The point is the military industrial complex. The point is the the domination. The point isn't like, oh, that's just even a bad idea. Well, it has nothing to do with, like, if your value is what it is in the military industrial complex, it's about like all the money that gets made and all the power, you know, like all the people that get to feel like they're powerful. And so you have to look at like, what is their value and what does that come from? You know, where do they put their life's values? We have a t-shirt at CODEPINK that says, it's a Gloria Steinem quote, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." And mostly we have that for ourselves, because we can go in Congress with a sign and people get really, really angry with us. Medea was outside the White House this weekend with, you know, Cuban Americans calling her names and saying crazy stuff. You know, so we're, you know, I assume everyone on this call is like, we're living out of a value that, you know, imperialism is not a good thing, and that war is never the answer. And it's always just, you know, going down to what is that value? Because of course, there's not, if you're speaking out of the value you have, you're gonna probably upset a few people. It's okay. It's the opportunity to teach. Right now, so much learning is happening because of that ad in the New York Times on Cuba, because people were carrying wrong ideas, and because of Ben and Jerry doing something so courageous, like not allowing the people occupying the land of the Palestinians to have their ice cream. All that's happening, that argument, it's like the people that are reading inside of it, their brains are getting to shift, because when you're watching the conversation happen is where your brain can shift more, not when you're in the argument, because in the argument, you tend to stay to your side, but it's the observers. I know what took me to outside the White House when Bush was calling for a war in Iraq was I just wanted to stand outside there so somebody could stand out there and say no, because I knew there were many other people in the country that felt like me, and there needed to be a no. Why does, you know, Medea and the team in DC disrupt those congressional hearings? Because there are people that want to feel sane, that are watching, that have a different set of values, and they want them in the to be at least scratching the powers that are moving forward, you know, stealing from their lives and destroying countries and people.
Thank you. I think Zoe might actually have a follow-up for this.
Yeah, you talked about speaking from your values, and that really resonates with me, but I just wanted to ask, this also ties into the parallel between the Palestine-Israel situation and what's going on with China. There are these competing narratives that are going on that if you support Palestinians, you're anti-Semitic, or if you support peace with China, then you're a genocide denier, or that you don't care about anti-Muslim discrimination. So how do you suggest we deal with our values being called into question like that, with these narratives that sort of use the fact that we care about these things, anti-Semitism and genocide, and perhaps what feels like a malicious way, to maybe make us question our own values?
Sure, thank you. Yes, so I'm going to just go back to what can I affect? I of course care if there's a genocide on the Uyghurs, and I care deeply if that is true. And you know what I say is then we need to do all we can to stop a war on China, because that will make the situation worse. What's happening in Palestine is happening with my tax dollars. It's happening by votes by senators. So I actually have a hand on the lever. So those are where my two levers are. My lever to help Xinjiang is on stopping war. My lever to help the Palestinian people is to be an activist for them in the United States, which is really what has Israel's back in the oppression of the Palestinian people. So as a US citizen, my taxes go to oppress the Palestinian people. If it were not for the United States of America, that oppression would not be happening. I can actually touch that lever. The best way I can support if there is human rights abuses in Xinjiang is to make sure I do everything I can to stop US aggression on China.
Thank you so much. And this might be taking things in a little bit of a different direction. I know that you've said that perhaps whether what's being shown in the media is true or not is maybe not the most important thing. But could you speak a little bit on what is being shown in the media, what you're seeing, and also maybe where that's coming from?
I mean, I'm sure it's coming from many different places. So I'm just gonna, let's start with, I'm gonna just start with the Red Scare. So you have a movement of capitalists that go, back very long way, but let's just go to after World War II, where, let's stop an alternative to capitalism from arising. So that's the Red Scare. What falls under that set of values and who's funded to, push them forward and make everyone frightened. I'm sure that's a mass of people. So there's a massive information coming out of them. And they're very frightened to lose their standing as capitalists, stealing from people and becoming billionaires. So there's a lot of people that are attached to the capitalist way of life. Then there's the military-industrial complex that has been, this isn't new. This is, they've been eyes on China for a long time, but it's been escalating from Obama to Trump to Biden. It's now at a hyper escalation with Biden. One of the things is, how many things are funded by the military industrial complex to create misinformation. I don't know, but it's a lot. I mean, the fact that it's even in bills that the Senate votes for, like, we will create misinformation about this, the propaganda is actually funded in these bills. So, we follow the Dongsheng news.org just to get some non-propaganda news around China. But we follow the Tricontinental because they do really in-depth pieces, and any activist can write the Tricon and say, this is a really stuck issue. It needs deep research. I mean, we live in really thin information, and to go deep, you need people that can actually take it deeper, do the research and come back. So the Tricontinental Center for Research, they're funded to serve the movements globally on tough questions that we need to answer. And so, right away, the place where when we started, I said, could you do on COVID and debunk all these lies? And they did a really deep research on COVID. And if that's one of the places, Zoe, of like where, if you want to take it deeper, because that's one of the places that's creating the xenophobia and all that COVID, lie. They did a very deep 3-part study. They just recently came out. Ting's Chalk did a deep study. She's one of the editors of the Dongsheng News on poverty alleviation. They, one of their partners in China has also gone to Shenzhen and done a report back on that. I'm staying out of that. It's, it's like, it's way over my head. All I know is if I really want to help the Uyghurs, that I've got to put all my energy into ending the aggression on China. Unfortunately, the aggression is already on the Uyghurs who have jobs that are being taken away from them. And I hear from my friends in China that young people in China are rising up against what's happening in the United States, because young people in China are losing their jobs because of the boycott on cotton. I mean, which is kind of ridiculous when in the United States, in Alabama, prisoners in the United States of America get paid 5 cents an hour to pick cotton. I mean, it's also absurd. So, all these ways to pick at China, they continually forget that these are human beings, just as we forgot with Iraq that they're human beings, and we forgot with Afghanistan that we're dealing with human beings. So, trying, one of the things is and RJ does this a lot at CODEPINK, is to disrupt some of these stories with, these are human beings you're talking about, these broad swaths of how you're going to fix something that you have absolutely no lever on change about. You're just using it to create more anger and more violence towards Asian people, one of the things that we do is try to interrupt those stories to show people what they're doing with those stories, that those stories are actually violent. That what you're spreading is actually a violence already, and mostly it's a violence to Asian Americans in the United States. So the misinformation is deep. I mean, I'm curious for you, Drew and Zoe, you know, it's like, what is that like to come of age when there's just, you understand how much propaganda you swim in? Just, you know, curious.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's something that we're all learning to navigate ourselves, because when you grow up pretty much taught something that could be potentially defined as propaganda, it's hard to debunk those things in your own mind and kind of reteach yourself and reaffirm what your own values are. And I do appreciate what you were talking about the difference between right and wrong and values. And I actually think Zoe actually has another follow-up question kind of about people in the media covering the Uyghur Muslims.
I do. This is sort of a follow-up from what you were saying about research and studies, and I'm also seeing a little bit about it in the chat. So who is Adrian Zentz, and what is his relevance to all this?
So I'm not going to go there because I would send you to other places to read, and I think the team will put them in the chat because I really don't want to spend time on someone that is that horrible. I value my life and I just don't want to go there. It's not my, I have great respect and gratitude to those people who are doing this deep research, but it's not mine to do. Mine is to, you know, end aggression on China. And I feel like the disruptors and propaganders, you know, they like distracting us. And I also am not going to be distracted. And so it's not that, you know, these amazing people that are doing this research, I, you know, kiss their feet, but you know, they count on me to be doing my work. And so, you know, my work is to help build a movement that's really big and really big tented and broad scoped. Because if we are going to stop this aggression, we need everyone, and we need to understand, you know, where we can show up and what we can actually do. And so that's where I spend my time and energy. Sorry, I'm not going to go there, but I'm sure RJ and Madison can link in there lots of research that's been done that can answer your questions.
Yeah, it looks like they are definitely on that in the chat, giving resources to everyone. So on sort of a different topic, you mentioned a little bit about how all of this sort of perpetuates violence against Asian people living in America and Asian Americans. And I was wondering if you could expand on that. We all heard the comments that Trump made around the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've all sort of seen some of the impacts of that, but tying this into sort of the broader picture of what's going on between the US and China.
Yeah, well, it's daily microaggressions if you're Asian, because people are really insensitive in how they talk about things and how they talk about China. I would say coming out of the Obama, the Trump, and the Biden administration and the military-industrial complex, they don't deal with these issues as like we're dealing with human beings. And so it becomes China, it becomes, you know, pivot to Asia. And in a time where we live in a country where people are really frustrated, you know, but I think there's like 65% of a populist movement, you know, both left and right. And that's a lot of not happiness with the structure of your country that you live in. So they're going to look for things to be angry at. I mean, why does Fox News have its power? Because it kind of feeds a bone to the dog every day of something to be angry at. And if out of the White House and out of the Pentagon are coming these ideas of we need to be angry at China, and China is the enemy, and China's doing this wrong and that wrong, and that's going to trickle down, because then they're going to be to blame by people who are angry. And so that's a long time. I mean, Asian people in the United States have been mistreated at a level that is really painful. As you know, as a U.S. citizen, to even to think about some of the things that have been had to be held by being Asian, and so you know, a complexity, a culture that's not understood or valued, and not even attempted to be understood or valued. So it's deep also in the sinewy fabrics of this empire. And it's deep in our, you know, education system, and it's deep in the yellow peril. And even as we kind of understand things we've done wrong, we didn't learn, because there's no apology, there's no recognition, there's no I'll behave differently, there's no accountability or responsibility. You know, much different than if you look at Germany and you know, the way they've atoned. That doesn't happen in the United States on anything. It doesn't happen on Indigenous people, on Black people, on Asian people, on, you know, Latin American. It's like or on all the places the United States has violated. There's no sense of accountability, responsibility, or setting it straight. So when you don't do that, then you leave open this place of being the enemy and being the place where anger can be targeted. And we've already seen this. We've seen the Pivot to Peace, one of our partners in the coalition we're all part of, is, you know, really committed to working in this community and organizing in this community for themselves. That, you know, the aggression on China, they are very clear, is going to be an aggression on them here in the United States. And they're organizing beautifully, and we work with them as much as we can. We were just together at a disruption outside of Nancy Pelosi's house, delivering signatures to her on, you know, how her efforts as a member of Congress are creating Asian hate.
Thank you. And I think it's important to recognize that oftentimes, you know, the enemies that we attempt to create abroad create the same at home. And I think that you saw that after Iraq and Afghanistan as well. And so remembering that these are things that have happened before, and these are things that are kind of deeply embedded within US and American history. And that everything kind of intersects in a way, and there is not just one way to look at things. And that actually kind of brings me to some of our final questions, which excite me also because I am a woman and I am interested in foreign affairs and foreign policy and peace and anti-war activism. And I just want to know from your own perspective, what kind of is this intersection between feminism and peace studies, and why are you so passionate about it, and why should all of us also be passionate about it?
I don't see an intersection. I think they're one and the same. So, you know, a feminist is anti-imperialist, anti-oppression, anti-extraction, anti-dominance, and that's what peace is. So, you know, that's, I am a feminist, and this is my life's work. And I feel, you know, being a peace activist, our work crosses everything, because, you know, it was a while ago in CODEPINK, kind of exhausted one day. I was just like, oh my God, we're not going to end war until we end the war economy. And the war economy is the patriarchy. It's the extractive, destructive, oppressive economy that's destroying us, our communities, and the planet. But there is a peace economy. I see it as the feminine economy, but it's the giving, sharing, caring, thriving, relational, resilient economy, without which none of us would be alive. But we live this lie that the war economy and wars are somehow doing something good for our life, which is not true. And, you know, here we are in this time where it just couldn't be more obvious. The work is, you know, to end the patriarchy, to end the empire, and to go back to the values of cooperation and care and connectivity and kindness, and listening and understanding and seeing the other, and you know, at CODEPINK, we have 21 ways to divest from the war economy, because it's understanding that we, peace activists, are also indoctrinated in the culture of the war economy. We live inside of it, and we have some of those really bad habits ourselves. And we can recognize them when we start to work on them. You know, at CODEPINK, when we started, it's like we got to see like how transactional we are and not relational. And, you know, how the war economy is structured that you feel like you live in scarcity instead of abundance, or that you're alienated instead of connected. And that whole alienation from nature, or the indigenous communities that have so held on to these wisdoms that we lack about life. And so I think as peace activists, you know, what drives us is that we want to create conditions conducive for life. And there is nothing the military industrial complex does, nothing an empire does, that creates conditions conducive for life. And so I think as a feminist, that's what you know, it's like, it's about, as a young woman, it was about equality, which meant the equality of all. It's about care, it's about the planet and the people. And war is never about the planet and the people. It's against the planet and the people. So for me, it's not an intersection. It is, they're one and the same.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Can I say something about our, why we started a feminist foreign policy project at CODEPINK, though, which is kind of scary. Medea noticed that there had been a poll when we were talking about peace with North Korea, when Trump was talking about peace with North Korea, and everybody was like, no, peace with North Korea. And a poll was done, and more women were against the peace with North Korea than for it. And in the polling of, you know, the United States forever, women are always on the side of peace. And what we realized was that, holy cow, we've been so hard working to stop war that we hadn't been doing the work of educating around what is a feminist foreign policy. You know, you can't just always be doing the no, you have to also be doing yes. So at CODEPINK, you know, working on educating around a feminist foreign policy, what is that? Which has been happening in universities, but it needs to happen in our organizations, our peace organizations. And it has to, and we have to be living it and teaching it. And so we both have the feminist foreign policy work that we do, and we're working in universities with women's studies department that didn't have feminist foreign policy lens inside of it. And then also cultivating a local peace economy, that when we cultivate our own local peace economy, it actually helps us see the war economy better, because it's all, you know, it's the small is the big. And it's like in our work, we want to make it a big tent, and making war is just stupid and ridiculous, the answer, and never the answer, the end goal. But the only way you get there is in the small stories, right? It's in the personal stories that help illuminate the problem. It's kind of like with the Ben and Jerry, I keep going back to that, because it was that action that illuminated the problem, and let people take sides very clearly. So you've got to have the small to be able to articulate and move the big. And so being connected to our local peace economies is super important. And that's why I'm such a big, super huge fan of mass peace action, because it really is rooted locally, and you care for each other, and you create community, and you nurture each other's intelligence, and you have the big conversations that illuminate the issues and help us decide where we are on them. You know, having these conversations, how do I think about this with my set of values? How do I have a safe place? Because, you know, when we get in at CODEPINK, we say we're disarming, because, and that's the costumes and the coloring and the way we, you know, dance and sing and make people laugh. Because if you come at people like this, no one's going to change. But if you come at listening, at being able to understand where they're coming from, being able to really understand, like, why would somebody think that way? Why would somebody have that value? You can't even start to affect change unless you listen, unless you really understand where somebody's coming from. And that happens one-on-one. And that happens in our community. And also change happens through community. As an activist, you know, you learn the very first thing, you can only change the person closest to you. I mean, everybody always wants to change their, you know, their great aunt Hilda, who's like a right winger. It's like, don't even go there. You know, she's got a different set of values than you. You're working with the people around you to strengthen the tuning forks that you are for peace. And it always takes strengthening, because we are up against a monster that is huge and well funded and well organized, and, you know, has been at this a really long time. So it's always about, how do we hold each other's hands? How do we make each other smarter? How do we understand the issues as deeply as possible and know what our job is in the movement? We can't do all of the jobs, right? But it's like, if we pick one and someone can rely on us for that, that's important and that's valuable. And that everything we do needs to be about building. And that is always relational. So, you know, it's like right now, I can't say enough. It's like, we can talk about all these big problems, but right now our work is to be building a movement big enough to affect this war machine that is really, the fastest train in America is the train to war. And we need to keep throwing things in its way and building this movement we need to stop it.
Thank you. I think that it's quite inspirational as, you know, a young woman to hear these words as well. So I appreciate that. I think Zoe has one last question and then we're going to wrap up. Thank you, Jody.
Yes, I just think this is the perfect place to ask if you have any further advice that you would give specifically to young female peace activists like us and the people around us.
Well, first of all, I have a lot of gratitude for you. So I want to just start with gratitude. Thank you for whatever inside of you brought you to understanding the need for peace. And then, you know, it's that, to not let the big issues crush you or distract you, but to find that thread that you can follow, and to know that, you know, what you are is honing this tuning fork that you are for peace. And so stay curious, stay questioning, find good allies and be a good ally. You know, people ask, you know, how can I keep doing this? It's so depressing. It's like, this is the most beautiful community of most amazing people that just make me cry for how beautiful they are. And, you know, when Medea and I get depressed, we just call each other and we go out in the streets with a sign. So activism, when you get depressed, is like, get out there with your sign, just grab. I mean, it doesn't take much is the other thing. It's like, to make a difference, 2 people with a sign can make a lot of noise, especially in pink. Because we say it's 10 people when you're in pink, because it just like stands out so big. I don't know if you saw me from the arrest in at the White House last week on Monday. I made the Boston Globe with my pink attire, because why? It stands out. So you just got to remember, going in pink also makes a big statement. But don't let the big crush you. Find the thing you can do right now, today, and follow it. Find the breadcrumbs that someone's left behind. You know, find the inspiration that is there for you. You know, create your posse, you know, grow together. There's so many people here. I see Cynthia Papermaster, you know, 19 years, CODEPINK has been doing this. And it's a family. We feed each other, we nourish each other. And at CODEPINK, our job, we always feel like, is to create the tools for activists to be engaged. So we have the day job of like the tools and the alerts and the things that can help you be smarter. But you know, it's the movement out there that is going to make the difference. Our jobs are to create tools, create connection, and create inspiration. We say educate, inspire, and activate. So, you know, find your path, take it deep. Because the deeper your roots, the more you can sway, you know, like a tree. So the more flexible you can be, the more you can listen, the more you don't have to protect yourself and your ideas, and the more powerful you can be.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here and for all that you do. I know we have a lot of gratitude towards you as well and other mentors like you. So yeah, thank you so much.
So I feel bad that I can stay a little bit more if there were questions. I also just want to acknowledge that RJ and Madison have been adding things in the chat along with some of the other team members of the China's Not Our Enemy team. But you did promise a few questions. So if anybody stayed late to get a question asked, I feel like I just want to don't leave anyone feeling like they didn't get a question asked. So it looks like Michael. And everybody else can leave, but the people that didn't get their questions asked. Oh, and there's Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth. Love you. There's another CODEPINKer from, 19 years in the streets, following us everywhere. Part of the family that keeps my heart warm and inspired.
So Jody, I finally got unmuted. So I love everything you're talking about. Every time I listen to you, I'm so inspired. The question I have though is the bankers. We talk about the military industrial complex, but we don't talk about the bankers behind the war machine. And it seems like we've loaded up every country on the planet with so much debt. And now China comes along with the Belt and Road Initiative. And so it looks like they're trying to use the same model that we did to take over the planet, in a sense, by lending people money, by having some kind of debt servitude or whatever it would be called. And I'm wondering where that's going to end up leading if our bankers are the ones that are freaking out that they won't get paid.
Okay, well, so that's a good question. So I call the bankers the war economy. So, it's a thing that has to end because it's oppressive and it's destructive and it's extractive. Madison, do you have the Evo quote that you could post? That, Evo tweeted, I think it was yesterday, something that just differentiated between an empire and power. And I don't want to badly quote him, so I'm going to wait till Madison puts it in the chat. But, yeah, lending money throughout history has been problematic. Is China doing it the same way as the United States? I don't know. I do know the Tricontinental is working on some deep research on this because I said, this is some deep stuff that needs to be answered by economists, and it's not my expertise. And there's lots of different stories about what's happening with China in Latin America and Africa, and it needs some really deep research. So I'm going to let you know that the Tricontinental has that ready to, coming out this year to kind of do a deep dive into that. Your question asks, well, am I going to stop China from loaning money to countries that have been extracted to death by the United States? I don't have my hand on that lever, but I think it's important to understand what China's doing, what the United States has done, and what's the difference between an empire and power, and what's the difference between a capitalist country and a socialist country, both having market economies. Is China isn't the IMF? Are they, following neoliberal liberal policies in their lending? They want to say they're not. I don't have an answer to that question. I don't even want to fantasize about who they are or what the difference is. It's just happening. And what's not there and what they're not doing with their loans is bringing bases and soldiers. So that's the only differentiation I know. And a market economy probably will always have lenders, but there's been, the lending of the United States and the IMF is a brutality. And so I don't know if that same brutality is going to be China. I don't have an answer to that question.
Okay. Thanks, Jody, and thanks, Michael, for that question. Let's take a question from Luis. Luis, can you unmute?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
we can hear
Okay,
you.
thanks. No, what I have sort of like an observation. It's not exactly a question. It's something I've been trying to figure out is like one of the things that I think is really wrong with the United States and is equally in a way wrong in China is how our countries treat animals. That we have factory farming here, which is horrendous, but then there's Chinese meat markets where all these poor critters get boiled to death alive. So I guess it's just something that I just wanted to bring up as an observation, as it's something that I'm sort of trying to work on to, it's like both places are horrendous in this aspect. And so it's a way that it's not like either one's good and the other one's bad. They're both bad. So it'll just be an interesting course of action. I think that, it's a crime against nature that what you were talking about, but it's not like one is doing things good and the other isn't. They're both awful. So anyway, just an observation.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Luis.
we'll see.
All right, I think we'll pass the floor back to Drew to start closing off the program.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your questions. And I know Jody thanked Madison and RJ, but I just want to reiterate that if anyone wants to save anything in the chat, you can always just fully copy and paste it. You can take your mouse and run down it and paste it into a Word doc, or you can also go as Madison said, just to the little 3 dots on the right and save things, because there is a lot of quite relevant, more detailed information in the chat if any of you want to save that for any future reference. So thank you for moderating that. And I guess before I close, Jody, is there any last words you would like to say to all of us before I do a couple of thank yous? But I just wanted to give you the floor one last time.
Thank you. So I just see a lot of people I'm super grateful for, including all of Mass Peace Action. It's wonderful to be in partnership with you, and I'm super grateful that it's brought us closer together, and I've gotten to get to know many of you much more, and I'm looking forward to more and more prodding and more questions and more leadership. And Drew and Zoe, thank you so much. That was just a beautiful conversation, and I just super grateful to you. And of course to my team, Madison and RJ and and Medea who was on here, and just all the code pinkers that, that live their lives out of a commitment to peace. And may, I just want to say that for me, it's a really strong place to stand and as a value, and it's nourished my life. And I think it has a lot of power. And I'm grateful for all of you who do, and may we just continue to grow and bring others with us and throw a better party than this madness that's happening around us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you again to the Community Church of Boston for co-sponsoring this event. Jody, it was just lovely talking to you and having a safe, honest space to talk about all of these issues in a way that I think makes everyone kind of more open-minded. And I feel quite honored to have been a part of this conversation. And for everyone else left in the audience, I just wanted to make a couple more notes. Number one, if you did enjoy this event, make sure to donate to our page just to ensure that we can put on more events like this, because that does matter to an extent. And keep an eye out actually for a follow-up email from either me or Zoe that will have both tonight's recorded conversation and a couple of additional links for you to go and get a little bit more knowledge and insight into the issues that we were talking about. And then finally, there are a couple of events that I also want to point your attention to that MAPPA is putting on in the coming weeks. First, this Friday at 4 p.m., we will be joined by Scott Horton, who is the director of the Libertarian Institute and editorial director of antiwar.com. And he will be joining us to talk about the bloated Pentagon budget and the expansion of US militarism. So if you're interested in any of these topics, you should tune into that 4 p.m. on Friday. And then secondly, the 76th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is coming up. And so in remembrance of the bombs dropped in both these cities, MAPPA is putting on a viewing of the movie The War Game in the Regent Theater in Arlington. And so if you want to hear more about these events, you should visit our website on our event page. And you can register for a couple of other webinars and things of that sort. But I just want to do one last thank you for everyone for joining us, and everyone at CODEPINK and just this community. It's a special one, so thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Peace and love.
Bye.